conversation for us this bright afternoon is the founder and CEO of ElectHER. Please welcome Ibijoke Faborode as she comes to the stage to take her place. If your hands are strong, your hands believe in inclusion, please put them together for Ibijoke as she comes forward. Good to see you. All right. Welcome, Ibijoke. Always a delight to have you here. Joining her very closely is our first man up here today. Please welcome Agwu Ojowu as he comes up this afternoon. He's senior consultant and Nigeria country lead at Africa Practice. Please appreciate him with a manly applause. Please sit right next to Ibijoke. In the course of their conversation, two panelists will join. They're very close, but we have to start the conversation whilst they're on their way. Honorable Commissioner for Commerce, Cooperatives, Trade and Investment, Lagos State, Honorable Folashade Amrose-Medebem is on her way. And when she gets in here, we'll lead her straight to the stage. Also, the Honorable Member, Lagos State House of Assembly, Honorable Princess Omolara Oyekan, will be joining up. She's also the Chair, Committee on Women Affairs at the Lagos State House of Assembly. They will come in and join. I know that they were a little delayed by state function going on, but they are on their way right now. I will like to quickly say that politics and public governance is even more scary for many women. We talk about how the gaps in entrepreneurship and career, and then the gap in politics and governance is even much wider. So it is good for us to have these very practical solutions on how we can all be more included in the conversation and the roles that we all have to play toward better governance in our country. On this note, Madam Moderator, I hand over to you.
Thank you all for joining us for this very exciting and important conversation. As Joyce mentioned that, dabbling in the terrain of politics sometimes can be quite scary because I think that it's a trigger word for a lot of people. Once you hear politics, it's like, oh, I don't want to get in there. I don't want to get killed. I don't want to be involved. Oh, politics is dirty. But I think what we're trying to achieve with this conversation today is to talk about the importance of politics, policy design, and its outcome on national development. Conversations like this are important in such gatherings, just because the conversations around politics and policy design or public governance can be somewhat of an echo chamber, where it's within the development space, it's within the same circles. And for us, when we have events like this, where we have majority participants from the private sector, one of the things that we aim to do is to make a case for the inclusion of women beyond women's issues. Positioning it as a socio-economic issue, one that has consequential impact, or implications on the lived experiences of all citizens. As Joyce mentioned, I have two other panelists today before I go to the only man on the panel today. And this is how it's done. This is the work. One is from the public governance space. One is from the political space. Even though they're both, in public governance space, we like to separate it because politics is politics sometimes. Elective office is different from appointive office. But we have quite an interesting perspective I want to present through this panel today. We have three representatives that I will be chatting with. And the reason why we're having this conversation with them is to bring in a broader perspective around women's issues, especially because of the representation we have today. Ife from El Tracker said something. She said, representation is everything. And I think for us, we want to dig deeper into the lens of representation today to understand the nuances and why this conversation is very important and why every stakeholder must take it importantly, And we're hoping that when you leave this conversation today, you're not only speaking about gender issues, you have a deepened understanding of gender issues. you understand that it's a matter of survival. It's not just talking about women. We're not being sentimental here. It's not because it's a nice to have. It's because it's a fundamental need to have. And also, we're going to talk about some data. We're going to talk about some case studies. It's really to educate ourselves and to have a deepening perspective about, how gender considerations impact the overall outcome of Nigeria. We talk about economic growth. We talk about investment. We talk about everything. So the fundamental question is, what's the fuss about gender inclusion? What's the fuss about in the inclusion of women? Why is it important? Why should I have to care as a private sector player? Why should I have to care as a public service, official? Or why should I have to care about an elected representative? So these are some of the conversations we're going to be having today. And we're going to be joined maybe in about 15 minutes or so by the Honorable Commissioner for Trade, Commerce, Cooperatives, and Investments in Lagos State, and also, a State House of Representative member. Both of them are female. But I'm more excited by this conversation today because we have a man on the panel. And so please, let's give him a warm welcome again. I believe we can do better. And I'll tell you why. We can't talk about women's issues or gender inclusion without talking about male allyship. For me, I'm not interested in rooms, I love the idea of community, safe spaces for women, where we can talk about issues, where we can, we can feel safe. But I also even appreciate better spaces where we have men caring about those issues, showing up and showing us that they're significant ecosystem players. Now, when I walked into this room today, I saw a common pattern. And I remember I shared with Agwu, I said, where are the men? What's the issue? I'm deeply concerned about this. Yes, it's Guardian Women Festival. But really, women cannot live in isolation without men. And for us to actually progress on the conversations around gender issues, we need the alpha of Nigeria in the room as well, duly represented, conversing with us, contributing to the solutions, helping us understand things from their lived experiences, the perspectives as well. And that is why these conversations are important. So when I come to those rooms and I see just women, my heart really bleeds because it feels like we are reinforcing the same echo chambers over and over again. So what I would plead is when we are coming for these functions, let's bring in the men within our organizations. Let's bring them to speak. Let's bring them to converse. Let's bring them to share, perspective about these conversations to ensure that it's rich, it's deep, it's diverse, it's inclusive as well. And that is why these conversations matter. So, Agwu, welcome to the conversation today. I wanted to set some context. But before we proceed with the conversation, because I'm trying to buy some time until our two other panelists, come, what's your response, to the representation of the room today? We're talking about, women's inclusion, and our conversation really centers on investing in women, shaping national development through gender inclusion in political leadership and public governance. When we come into this room today, what do you see? And what would you like to see, moving forward in spaces like this, where we have this deep, important, critical conversations that, help us to champion the conversation around inclusion, from a male and a female perspective?
Thank you, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And even though I'm a man, I'm a guardian woman today. Thank you. What I have seen today is that, like the earlier panelists talked about, the common saying, what a man can do, a woman can do better. It's proven every day in our organizations, in our societies, in every aspect of life. And something I would like to see going forward is to see how we can ingrain that narrative into everyday life more and more, because it is evident that countries all over the world that have more economically empowered women have better indicators on human development on all fronts. So one thing that I think will be critical to get this going, especially in Nigeria, is to domesticate that story. Can we look at specific local governments where you have more economically empowered women and see how that local government is thriving and communicate that to the relevant political and appointed leaders to make that story drive home more? And I think on the inclusion side of things, I think it's something that needs to be very holistical. It needs to start from the foundation. We have inherent systematic prejudices against women that keep women down in terms of you can't do this, you can't achieve this, and I think that needs to start from the foundational level, getting down to the educational system, from the primary level all the way through to tertiary level, ensuring that we are very deliberate about it to ensure that a primary school child can see that, yes, I can grow up to be as big as engineer, I can grow up to be as big as anybody in the world, so that they have these role models they can look up to. Because unfortunately, even though we are able to improve some levels of education among the girl child, there's still not that aspiration because the whole cycle is not connected. That bridge, there's still a disconnect there. So to ensure that we are educating our girl children and ensuring that they can aspire to be anything they want to be in life, and having those role models for them to see is, I think, a very important way to get that inclusion going.
So, thank you for that, Agwu. Before we go deep into the conversation, so when I walked in this room today, I listened to, I'll call her Excellency, because being the first, female president of the Nigeria Society of Engineers is a big deal. And that goes again to representation, the importance of representation. I've never had a personal encounter with you, but my father used to be a president, Professor Faborode, before. And so when I looked at you, I said, yes, that is me on the stage speaking as well. Now, that's a woman. Even though my father, was once a president, yes, that's some perspective. But having a woman there who shares my lived experience, who also mirrors, and represents me in society, gives it a much deeper and a personalized perspective to you. So thank you. I know you run amongst men. And again, working in that space, you're leading amongst men. And I just want us to also recognize and say thank you to her again for being here, for showing up, for representing us. And of course, you have an entire community looking up to you and looking to support you as well. I'm going to give some perspective, into why this conversation is important, but I'm going to start with a very short question. What do you think, or what is the highest composition in terms of women's representation in the National Assembly that we've had in Nigeria since 1999? Anyone? Have we ever had 50%? Have we ever had 20%? Have we ever had 10%? How many do you guys really think with me? When you look at the percentile composition? Anyone? And it's okay to be wrong. Half of the times I struggle with these things, I have to quickly go and check. Because honestly, access to data is also, something we struggle with in Nigeria. There's a lot of recycled data, and there's a lot of wrong data as well. And so that's why conversations like these, are important. Okay, since no one is willing to answer, I'll just give you a rough figure. We've never had up to 10% representation at the National Parliament since the commencement of the Fourth Republic. So imagine that. Now, we talk about the economic situation in Nigeria, we talk about rising inflation, we talk about maternal mortality, we talk about infant mortality, we talk about, the lack of financial inclusion when it comes to women. But have we ever pondered to think through the role of policy design? The role of policy design in actually shaping the outcome of the economy. Do we really understand, the social infrastructure in Nigeria? As businesses, do we actually really care? Or are we looking at, just the bottom line and profit? So I'm going to quote a very quick data. So a colleague of mine actually shared a report from The Economist, I think about 2 days ago. And, the report stated that, across mostly rich countries, women's share of directorship reached 33% in 2023, in all-time high. But also stated that in 2020, consultants at McKinsey also found out that firms in the top quartile for both gender diversity were 25% likelier to outperform their industry average than those in the bottom quartile. Again, this helps us understand why these things are very nuanced and why it's important for us to be able to create linkages when we have this conversation. I was discussing with Agwu just before we came on, and I said, I would really love to see conversations around gender considerations, around inclusion that is deeply data-driven. Deeply data-driven, highly intellectual, because I'll tell you why. It's not just the men. It is even the understanding of other women as well. It's the understanding of the entire Nigeria when we talk about gender considerations. It's the understanding of our lawmakers, both at the local, at the state, at the federal level. It's the understanding of different stakeholders making decisions, deploying funding and resourcing into the space, the understanding of gender considerations. What do we really understand? There are a lot of patterns in the space that are quite worrisome. When we talk about the culture of tokenism, a lot of countries talk about gender inclusion, and unfortunately, I'm not, I can be quite controversial, and I'm okay with that, because I have my heart in the right place. I personally am very sick and tired of people trivializing women's issues. It's a socio-economic issue, it's a national development issue, it's a survival issue, right? But then we have countries, we have companies that will come in and say, oh, we've empowered 15 women. We've done this at a very micro level. Are we holding ourselves accountable to understand the deepening perspective when it comes to, gender considerations? We have lawmakers, government officials, who would posture. Bringing on a woman on board looks very important, but do they have that voice to make the decisions? Are they involved at the highest level of political decision-making or where we shape our policies? So these are things that we need to think about, right? The numbers are not good. Nigeria has never had up to 10% at the national parliament. At the national parliament. In fact, at the moment, out of 109 senatorial seats, I think we have just about 3 that are female. At the House of Assembly, at the House of Representatives, I think we have between 13 and 15. Of course, we know that, tribunals were just concluded, so a couple of things are still being contested. That's why I'm not giving accurate figures. So you can imagine how this will shape outcomes when it comes to policies. You can imagine, and if you look at the budgetary allocation, how much goes to education? How much goes to healthcare? That's when you know that there's a fundamental problem, within Nigeria. And so all I will ask people to, what I would plead with people is to ensure that when we are having conversations around gender, we do not posture it simply as women's issues, give women their rights. We need to posture and sell these issues as socioeconomic issues. We need to make cases for them. An average business person would tell you, well, how do I make profit? What is my bottom line? So how about we understand what data says, and we can prove to businesses that when you invest in women, your profitability margins will surge. How about we tell our politicians that these are very clear case studies, that when you involve women, in decision-making, in the decision-making architecture and infrastructure, that, you're going to see socioeconomic growth with clear indicators. These are the conversations we want to have. And that's why I'm excited to have someone like, Agwu here, who is an economist, speaking to us today. Let's leave the other issues. We know what the issues are, so I'm not going to ask you, oh, why are women not included? We know there are 1,000,001 reasons, and we don't want to get started. But I think for me, why is it important to have this conversation? Why is it important to talk about women's inclusion, in political and in public governance? Why should we care as the private sector, as development partners, as women, even, from data, from your experience on the field, you know, what is data saying? What are the examples we can find? And how do we make a solid business case for the inclusion of women across all facets of society? That's a very long one.
So I'll just give a quick analogy. It's almost like you're trying to run a race with one of your hands and one of your legs tied behind your back. You can't succeed. In Nigeria, we have about a 50-50 split between men and women, but the level of representation of women, both in the political space and the public space, and the level of economic empowerment amongst women is abysmal. Without sufficient and adequate empowerment of women, representation of women across all spheres, we are still going to keep complaining about the same everyday issues that are in our faces: inflation, lack of FX, poor revenues. And this all they all have their root origins in the lack of empowerment of women, because we are basically leaving 50% of our population, of our workforce, constrained. Without empowering our women workforce entirely, we are working at half capacity. It's like driving your car with half tank and hoping that you get where full tank will be able to get you to. Doesn't work. So it has to be a very deliberate process.
I'd like us to, you know, give a very warm welcome to our other two panelists. And as I mentioned, they were on a state function. But one thing we will take from this is that they still showed up. It shows how great women are multitasking and still coming to have this conversation. The Honorable Commissioner insisted, I must be here today, and that matters. You know, the Honorable House of Assembly member insisted, I must be here today. So I don't want us to take this, you know, trivially. I want us to understand the importance of recognition, of recognition, representation, and showing up. Because showing up sometimes is 90% of the work. And when we have more women with voices in society show up, we deepen the conversation to be more reflective, to be more nuanced, and to be more solutions-oriented. So thank you so much for showing up to the Honorable Commissioner and Honorable Lara. I'm very excited that we have our complete panel now. I'm sure you've noticed that I've been stalling a bit since morning. So now I'm very excited to start the conversation because it is an important one. And again, you know, the gentleman in our midst today, you've been a very good sportsman. He has played along and ensured that, you know, we could essentially wait. So thank you so much, you know, for that support as well. And that's why we talk about male allyship. You know, he said you can't move with, you know, what's the analogy you talked about again?
So you can't move with one hand and one leg tied behind your back.
You need both, essentially.
Just before you jump into the rest of the conversation, please let me cut in. We'd like to take a very quick photograph before we let our keynote speaker leave. And would want to take advantage of those of us who are here right now, please. Our very beloved keynote speaker, the first ever woman president of the Nigeria Society of Engineers, a fellow of the Nigeria Society of Engineers herself. Please join up here. Welcome her again. You heard her speak before. Engineer Margaret Aino, thank you so much. Our festival creator would ask you to please join in this shot very quickly. Anita Ibru. We cannot stop celebrating Anita for making this happen. Herself and her entire team, they've made this happen. Thank you. Onakoya, we love you from a distance and we are so delighted to see you close up. Please come through, come through, come through, come through, come through. Join up on this shot as well. We celebrate you and the wonderful work you're doing in slums using such an innovative tool that some of us don't even have any clue what to do with. Yes. For gender balance, height balance, complexion balance. No, I think we're good. Yes, we really are good to see. So please, who is the camera man we're looking at? Which one? Yes, the person with his hand up. Everyone, please look there, smile, and say, Guardian Woman. Yes. Please smile once again. Look forward, straight ahead. Yes, you can use the International Women's Day sign. It's actually a heart sign. We're inspiring inclusion together. Smile. Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Keynote Speaker, thank you. Madam Festival Creator, thank you. Tunde, see you upstage soon. And we'll hand over to the moderator, Ibijoke Faborode, to continue this panel session, Invest in Women. Thank you. All right, ma'am, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Who's excited about
add the
this
2 minutes back to your time.
Thank you very much. Who's excited about this conversation?
Woo!
Hands?
Yeah.
Yes, we need your energy. So I like a very lively audience. I like it to be interactive because we are about to dip into some depth of wisdom today. And I would say get your pens and your paper and, you know, also get ready to ask 1 or 2 questions after the conversation. Honorable Commissioner and, you know, Honorable Member, before you came, we were just setting some context around, you know, just the status quo in terms of representation when it comes to elected and appointed representation in Nigeria. We posed the question to the audience asking them the highest percentile we've actually witnessed when it comes to women's representation in parliament in Nigeria. And most people were shocked when we said we've never reached the 10%, you know, mark. And so that's a fundamental challenge. But also, one of the things we talked about is the understanding, you know, of conversations or issues when it comes to gender exclusion. Beyond tokenism, beyond posture, beyond CSR, to really deepen our knowledge around it. But what I'm mostly excited about today is we have 3 different perspectives, which is going to reach in the conversation. Honorable Commissioner, this is your first venture into the political terrain, although from an appointee, but you've always worked in the private sector, and you have, you know, extensive years of experience across, you know, finance and other knowledge areas. Honorable Member, this is your first array into politics as well, representation on an elective politics, which is quite important at the state level for one of the biggest commercial capitals in the world. That is a heavy, heavy load to carry. And also you're the chairman or, you know, in one of the committees, you know, at that level as well. And then we have Agwu, who is an economist, as a senior consultant and the country head for the Africa practice. So they work with, you know, a lot of the development partners. Managing their funds is the guy to meet. I'm just kidding. Managing their funds, but also helping them understand, you know, just various perspectives when it comes to development in the country, where they should put their money, evaluation. You know, I will leave the, you know, all that technical detail. And really today is to understand from your perspective, you know, this conversation around investing in women and, you know, there's the importance of including women in political and public governance. So I'm going to start from the very basics, right, which is really, and I'm going to start with the Honorable Commissioner. My first question really is around understanding the why. I know we have a lot of conversations around, oh, women are not, you know, in political office or public office. We don't have significant numbers of women. But why should we, as basic as that conversation is, or that question is, it's a very powerful one. There's so many stakeholders today from the private sector. What is the interpretation people need to understand? What is the case for the inclusion of women in political, in political office and public governance? Now, you bring 2 perspectives. You've come from the private sector, but you're in the public office now. Why does this matter at this time? Investing in women and ensuring that they're represented in decision-making seats.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Once again, profound apologies for coming late. I'd like to first of all congratulate Guardian Women for convening this very, very commendable platform, an important platform. So back to your question, understanding the why. I think the why is compelling across a number of dimensions. And the first one is really that when they say women are involved, women win. Women consider many, many perspectives. Women probe and disturb. And I say that intentionally because we keep asking those questions. When women are there, a lot more things get done. Now, why have we not been able to achieve? And I'm going to distinguish between equality and equity. And my definition of gender equality is that, and I'll use an analogy, is that we provide a shoe for every woman, while equity is about providing a shoe for every woman that fits. And there's a very important distinction. So that's another compelling case for why? Because we continue to ask those questions. And I think the other aspect as to why we're no longer, or why we're not achieving equity, is there's a huge dose of unconscious bias out there. And I'll give you an example. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I was asked to moderate a panel, actually, convened by PwC. Or is it McKinsey? I can't remember. But the whole essence of it really was how we can try and push for the equality bill, which was being pushed by the time by one of the lady speakers. I can't remember. I think it was in Ekiti or something. I can't remember her name. And the whole essence of it was that when we probed and disturbed through the platform, we invited some of those key she for he's, such as your esteemed self. And what he said was, why do women need to be there? I mean, it was a case of, when we started to educate, guess what? That actual person became an ally. And that ally, when you're driving change, when you're driving transformation, it's important that you start to get advocates. And so those were some of the key reasons. And obviously, we have some precedent in other countries, and of course, obviously in Lagos, under the esteemed governorship of, and leadership of Mr. Babajide Olushola Sanwo-Olu, who has made an intentional effort under the Lagos State Themes Plus Development Agenda. Under his second administration, there's a plus, and that plus stands for youth, and it's actually a sign, Themes Plus, and it's about youth inclusion, gender equity, and trying to make sure that there's equity for all. And that also goes with about ensuring that at the leadership, the tone from the top is also very important. And I take that mantra from coming from the private sector. It's always the tone from the top that's really compelling. So when you're trying to drive this, it's really important. And also for us to also showcase and toot our own horn. So when you said and thanked us for coming here, that was one of the reasons why we made sure we actually had to be here, because we understand how important it is. And whilst we're here, and we've been privileged, appointed, elected, however the case you get there, whilst we're here, we need to make sure that we're opening the door for others. Thank you.
Wow. So we'll say it was worth the wait, right? Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I love the fact that you clearly distilled and differentiated between equity and equality, because that's one conversation in the space. 50-50 is not, 50-50 might not be equity sometimes, right? And she said equity is providing a shoot for every woman that fits. And I think that's very important.
And I just want to also give you another stat. I think it was according to the UN Women. According to them, it's going to take 300 distant years to close the gender equity gap. So in that case, we need to accelerate fast. And so that's why I really wanted to make that distinction. Thank you.
That's very important, because, I mean, my next question will be to you, honorable member. And, she mentioned, she just quoted the data from the UN Women saying it's going to take 300 distant years. I mean, my great-grandchildren will be alive then. And it's just really sad to say in my lifetime, we're not really going to close it. But again, it's about acceleration, which is why she talks about the concept of equity and not the concept of equality, right? 5 gender-centric bills were thrown out of a male-dominated National Assembly on the first day of the International Women's Month in 2022. That hit everyone by surprise. There were so many expressions. Anger, was one of them, saying, oh, they don't care about women. But the truth was that people didn't even know about the bill until that time, a lot of people. So I don't want to go into the nuances and the conversations that, we're having to retrospect and saying, how did we women push this bill? But also there's something fundamental. It was a male-dominated parliament that threw out that bill. And I want us to stay on the issue. Now, Honorable Commissioner talked about the concept of equity and, and equality. Now, this is your first time and your first venture into elective politics, right, as an honorable member in the State House of Assembly in Lagos State. what are your observations, from the gender lens? What is missing? And why is this conversation, more important than ever? When you look at, your perspective before you ventured into elective office, and now that you're there, can you help us understand why this conversation must be accelerated, in the words of Honorable Commissioner, right? We can't wait 300 years. We don't know what's going to happen by then, right? But why is this conversation more important now, especially as an elected official in government? What are the nuances? What are the perspectives we need to put in consideration that the average person here might not really understand today?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And please accept our apologies for coming late. We were at the Legislative and Executive Party at a hotel, and that's the 18th edition, to ensure that we have collaborative spirits amongst ourselves. So I don't want to really push too much on this, but I'm really surprised we're still having this conversation at this stage. Because basically, parliamentarians, that's women elected into office, is just at 4.4%. Nigeria is at the barrel bottom. We have Rwanda leading at 64%, Senegal, South Africa, top 3. And here is the giant of Africa at the bottom at 4.4%. Ghana is doing way better, and so it takes us back to home. Let me start with Lagos, for example. On the very first day of March 2022, a month known to celebrate women, they threw out gender-centric bills, all 5 of them. I'm sure some of them didn't even want to know what it was about. Let me tell you the very first one. It was about women claiming rights of their marriages, claiming the state of marriages, where they're from. They could actually claim their husband's states. And this actually affected our judges. I knew female judges that were deserving of certain positions, and they couldn't get that position because they weren't from the state, claiming that no, they have to go back to their initial state of birth, and they can't claim the state of marriage. The second one was about creating special seats. We're not saying we're coming to take over your seats. We're just asking to create more seats for women to accommodate more women. So until we close this gender gap in between, we're not going anywhere. Right now, in the Lagos State House of Assembly, out of 40 members, we're only 4 women, of which I'm the youngest amongst them. Only 4 of them. So let us go to the National Assembly. House of Rep from Lagos State, at the House of Representatives, we only have 1 female. Honorable Kafilat Ogbara from Lagos State. So in total of you saying you have over 300 and something senators, you have only 4 senators at the National Assembly. And before they can actually speak on the floor, even to get permission to speak on the floor, you should think it's easy. I heard this, I saw it myself. They take permission and sometimes are not granted that permission to speak. Out of 4 of them. So sometimes we go back. We understand that, yes, elected positions are really not it. And so why some women will actually opt for appointees or appointed position. But we need to do better. Nigeria as a country needs to do better. She wasn't telling tales when she said we've never attained 10%. It's always been between 3 to 4.4, maximum 5.2. From state legislatures to federal. So how long do we have to go with this? How much more can we do? 300 years, we need to accelerate fast, just like she said. How much more can we do? And so it's me imploring every single person here. I went into my first election and I won. I had help from NGOs, particularly Yaga Africa. They prepared me. I knew what I was going in for. I didn't go in as a novice. I knew what to fight for. I knew what to stand by. ElectHER also came on board. So it's me basically saying that, okay, I'm not going in as someone that doesn't know what she wants. I knew what I wanted, and I knew I was ready to fight for it. So we need to do more. Thank you very much.
Very much. And this is why it's important to have diverse perspective when we have this conversation. When you have a woman, I mean, I think you're packaging it very nicely, but we know it's not easy. Being a woman amongst, there's a lot of energy in the room that doesn't even give you the permission sometimes to take decisions. I've also sat, in some sessions, and sometimes you almost want to just jump up because of some things you see. But it just shows you that we need to accelerate this conversation. When the bills were rejected, I had to retrospect. I was angry, but something I was like, look, we can't fix the system from the outside. Regardless of the conversations we want to have, there's a status quo here, which is Nigeria has a sociocultural dimension. One that is deeply entrenched, in a lot of historical oversight. Because I don't even want to go to how the roles of women in the pre-independence era, socioeconomic and politically, have been undermined. However, we are where we are today, and there's a strong connotation around the representation of women. Women should not be in political positions. Women are not strong enough. Women are too emotional. Women can govern the country. You will be surprised that these are still fundamental issues. Then when you get to the National Assembly, or you get to the state, the state assemblies, where critical policy decisions are made, I always try to help people understand the difference between the policy framework and the legal framework. Nigeria has some of the prettiest documents on papers in the world. We actually have a lot of intellectuals. I'm from Ondo State. I know how many professors we have from Ekiti and Ondo. So imagine how many documents we have. But here's the thing. We're very poor when it comes to legal frameworks in the country. And that is why the role that people like Honorable Lara, play is very important. A round of applause for her again. And I say that with, a lot of deep genuity. I remember the first time I went for my public presentation at the National Assembly. I used to think I was very confident. And I was meant to present there, but looking at that room, oh my God, I felt so scared. And all of a sudden, I couldn't articulate myself. I wasn't coherent. And then the man just kept saying, push your ear back, bend lower. And that just demoralized me. But I'll tell you something fundamental that happened. Until today, I will keep on honoring that woman, because they say that, and that's why intergenerational dialogues are important. Mentorship, meaningful mentorship is important. Honorable Aisha Duku. Now, she did not make it back as a legislator in the 10th Assembly, but she did something. She was the House Committee Chair on Constitutional Review then, and she just, from nowhere, she said, let the woman speak. And the all was silent, and everyone just started clapping. And I regained my confidence, and we presented our proposition. Now, here's the thing. My team and I had spent months researching, case studies, everything. And I got on that stage, and I blanked out. If Honorable Aisha Duku did not encourage me that day, I can imagine what that will do to my confidence. I probably won't even be doing ElectHER right now, because it takes just one thing to tick you off, and feed into that self-doubt sometimes. So the work that parliamentarians do are important. And because we have private sector representation today, we're still going to come back again when we start talking about multi-stakeholder, multi-dimensional partnership, and the importance of actually, creating and fostering that dialogue and ensuring that we can bring in different people. Now, you mentioned Rwanda when you were speaking, and here's the thing. Rwanda came out from, a period of genocide, devastation. No one thought they were going to recover. But right now they have the highest representation when it comes to parliament, women's representation in parliament in fact, in the world, right? And year-on-year analysis, Rwanda has actually maintained and actually, sometimes, gone beyond the 8% percentile increase in the GDP every single year. But we call ourselves the giants of Africa, and we know where we are today. So maybe if something is not working, perhaps we need to rethink this, right? And that brings me to you, Agwu. Agwu, you're an economist. You've worked, around financial inclusion. You worked through all dimensions, right? And I know that you were just starting the conversation when, our two excellencies came in. And here's the thing. We're talking about inclusion. I'm very intentional when I'm moderating sessions to ensure that we make socioeconomic cases for gender inclusion, for the concept of equity, helping people understand from where you sit, why is this conversation important? How can we improve the nuanced perspective on gender representation across, different representations from society like we have in the room today?
Thank you. I'll come to your very last point now is on inclusion and looking at the timeline that we're dealing with, there has to be a very intense and specific intention to ensure that we are focusing on women development. At Africa Practice, one of the things that we do, whenever we put out job adverts, we add a caveat at the bottom saying that even if you don't meet all the qualifications, go ahead and apply. And more often than not, women are less likely to apply, given that extra encouragement. So we're particularly intentional about it, and we've been able to maintain across board a 50-50 divide between men and women. Looking at financial inclusion specifically, some of the studies that we've done have shown that, especially in the north, northern women are the most excluded people financially in Nigeria. And the way it works is they're excluded from access to identity, and because they're excluded from access to identity, they're excluded from access to credit and financing, and because they're excluded from access to credit and financing, they don't have the time to do anything outside of what they do to move from hand to mouth. So they can't actually go around to get identity. So they are stuck in a reinforcing circle of poverty. And without an intentional policy or intentional initiative to break out of that, we're going to have pockets of poverty where people are stuck in poverty perpetually. So we need to be particularly intentional to ensure that we can get people out of poverty and include them in finances, include them in access to governance. And beyond that, something I had spoken about earlier is there's a need for us, everyone here knows that countries that have more economically empowered women, countries that have more women representation, do better on all fronts, all the HDI indicators, GDP and all. But it's not cascading down in Nigeria. I think there's a need for us to break that story down. I think there's a need for us to look at specific local government areas, specific constituencies, highlight constituencies that have more economically empowered women, and show how it correlates to the well-being in that place. And it's a no-brainer. It's going to clearly show that with more economically empowered women, with more women representation, there is clear economic and social benefits in those localities. And I think at that point, we can now start to accelerate this thing, because 300 years is a ridiculous amount of time. And finally, I also think we need to get right down to the foundation of things, starting from the education level, starting from primary school. We need to give the girl child someone to look up to. We need to make more role models of our distinguished women that have made it to the higher echelons of life, so that while you're in school, seated, and someone is telling you that, oh, I can't do it, it's like, Honorable did it, I can get there. So showing them where they can aspire to reach, I think is very important.
So much. So we need to take it down to the primary school levels, educate the young child so that we can also reorientate their minds as well. We need to also understand the multiply effect, of investing in women and how that trickles down to different aspects of the economy. Thank you so much for this. So let's talk about mainstreaming. I mean, we talked about, there's an obvious global case, right? And is it that we're turning a blind side? Because we have clear evidence-based data showing that when you invest in women, you invest in national development, you invest in socioeconomic progression. But I'm more of a logical person, a realistic person. There's a status quo, right? We're seeing a retrogression, we're seeing stagnancy, and so it makes us ponder on what needs to happen next. And this brings me to the conversation around mainstreaming. Mainstreaming. And I say that because getting the average private person in the private sector to really care about issues of women's representation of public governance and political leadership, can be more, somewhat of a Herculean task sometimes. You almost need to convince and convince and convince, oh, we don't discuss politics. Oh, we are political. Right? But it's not about partisanship. My question here is, and I'm going to start with you, Honorable Commissioner. I love the transition. You've come from the private sector, so it's like been there, done that. So I'm going to have that honest conversation, right? how do we mainstream this conversation to ensure that everyone is listening? And not just listening, listening meaningfully. Because I'm really scared. 300 years. In my lifetime, I want to feel like I did something different, right? So what do we need to do to ensure that we can bridge this gap, we can drive meaningful conversations, and we can get the right people in the room? The reason I said that is there's the posturing, there's the tokenism. When you have conferences like this, people say the female representatives. I'm tired of that. Some of the male politicians will tell you that, please, let somebody else deal with me, not Ibijoke, because I will insist that, well, I want you to be there. Don't you have female children? Don't you have this? So, I mean, I make it a joke, but they have to show up eventually. But what we've seen is that they send representatives. Private sector as well, you invite the CEO, he sends a female representative. So what's really going on? How do we mainstream this issue to be taken as a critical conversation that everybody needs to be involved in?
Thank you very much. Yes, and I'm going to actually underscore the point you just made. We're all here today. And it shouldn't just be about us just showing up and having a conversation. I think what would be good from an outcome, defined as a successful outcome from today, is for there to be some specific actions. Where am I going with this? What gets measured gets done. That's one. How can we mainstream? I think it's really important to be, as I mentioned, the tone from the top is very important. Obviously, coming from the private sector, it wasn't just the tone from the top. It's also about having some specific KPIs, key performance indicators, such as on so-and-so board of such a company, there's going to be at least a certain number of women. And that's a fact, and that's just that. Specifically, statements. Do you understand? About being very clear. I'm going to quickly go back to stats. My Honorable mentioned some statistics, albeit very low, or should I say skewed, to the fact that women are not achieving equity. I keep reusing that word. I think globally, there are only about 26 female heads of state. Now, that's very low. But let's also look at that fact. Those that are there, what impact are they making? How can we form allyship? Legislation, I mentioned the fact, and I'm happy that you said that, you mentioned those bills and they were all thrown out. So what was done about that? Women don't give up, do we? We don't give up at the first hurdle. So what we need to do is go back to the drawing board. I mentioned to you that the platform that I moderated then, which was to really try and understand why, and we got to it because we started to probe and disturb. It's like peeling an onion. And what we've got to understand was it was simply unconscious bias. The people that were actually voting, i.e. men, didn't understand why women needed to have an equality bill. And so that conversation started to go. We formed allyships and they started to understand. Mainstream is about legislation. Mainstream is about communication. Mainstream is about inclusion. I'm the Commissioner for Commerce, Cooperatives, Trade and Industry for Lagos State. I'm very intentional. But my intentionality has a definition. It's about being audacious and about being very specific. So my mandate under Mr. Governor's leadership is really about driving economic prosperity and growth. It's about focusing on trade. And the third one is about trying to strengthen the organized private sector. Now listen, I called it out. I said, yes, I will do all of that through MSMEs, female MSMEs, I called that out, through nanos. Nanos are those informal sectors who make up the backbone of our economy. They've been, quite frankly, historically ignored. So how can we start to work with them? I'm forcing those conversations. I'm being intentional. I'm being audacious. Do you understand? And I'm also looking at quick wins as well. Honorable and I, coming here today, took a lot because we obviously realized the room was full of men. Could we leave? She was sending me messages. We were talking to each other. I hope you don't mind me sharing. But the fact is that we said we're going to come here no matter the time because this is an important conversation. So it's also about showing up, speaking up, and taking some action. Those would be just some of my things to say. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to pose the same question to you, Honorable Member, because Joyce, you're going to oblige us. This is very important conversation.
Very important.
Can we continue? Of course, I respect time, but we'll wrap up. Give us about 10 minutes, 5 minutes to round up. So, Honorable Member,
real quick.
Please.
You said mainstream. We can't get anything done if we do not have a legal framework. Please, it's really important. We talk every time. We'll come back here next year and still the same thing. We cannot get anything done, please bear it in mind, without the legal framework. So we need to know that with women, we can get things done lobbying. That's what I'm very good at. We need to lobby each and every one of them. Your uncles, your brother, the PA that is an assistant to someone in the National Assembly, the State Assembly, please reach out to every single one. The percentage is too low. EU literally had a program for us last week. Women in parliament were less than 50 in the room. State assemblies and legislators at the National Assembly, it's really poor. Over 1,500 seats and we're less than 50 in the room. It's really, really poor. Until we start focusing on the legal framework, we're not going anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I like that. Agwu.
I think all has been said. I think from the economic point of view, it boils down to we complain about inflation, we complain about revenues, yet we keep 50% of our workforce constrained. Makes no sense.
All right, well, a man of few words. Again, I want to say thank you to my panel. I think in a very short time, we've really dug deep into some of the critical issues and what needs to happen. We've talked about, women being audacious and showing up and not giving up. And you asked a fundamental question, what happened to those bills? Now, it's the policy season at the National Assembly. At the National State Assembly, a lot of bill reintroductions were done. And I would just encourage people to stay on the news, follow the news, and see where you can support as much as possible and see how we can have multi-stakeholder collaboration to drive this policy agenda. We're here for you at ElectHER, always. But I would also love to see, that multi-dimensional collaboration with the media, with women in business, women at the board level. We need to throw our full weight as women in the economic sector to push the national development agenda when it comes to the policy landscape. Because what is missing at policy design will not be seen when when it comes to policy outcomes. And I think we need to remember that. So thank you so much, for joining us today. And this will be the end of our conversation. Thank you.
And we deeply appreciate you, our moderator, Ibijoke Faborode, for making this happen. Please stand together for a group photograph before we leave the stage. Thank you so much. If you have enjoyed the discourse and this is something you would take ownership of in encouraging women in politics, please do well to take note. A special request is being made for Lady Maiden Ibru, MFR, to join up in this photo session. She is our woman leader in the room, not just our woman leader, our chairman, our president, our all in all. Without her, our guardian woman number one, we would not have been here today. Oh my goodness. How is it that you continue to shine so through over 70 years of age, 75 if I'm not even mistaken, and there she is, telling us that we can do it and we can have it all at different times if we keep our heads screwed on right and continue to collaborate for greater wins amongst us women. A guardian woman.
Investment in women now is especially critical given the financial constraint that Nigeria finds itself in. By not empowering our women, we are basically constraining about 50% of our workforce. And as the saying goes, what a man can do, a woman can do better. And that proves itself over and over. So it's almost a no-brainer to ensure that we empower our women, to ensure that they're contributing to national development in a meaningful way. And we would all be better for it, because looking at any other country that has higher level of economically empowered women, they all have better human development indicators, better GDP, and better mortality rates, better everything really. So it's almost a no-brainer to ensure that we economically empower women. Like Honorable Omolara said, there's a need for legislation. Without legislation, we keep coming back and talking. So there's a need for legislation that is deliberate. It has to be very deliberate about it to ensure that we are promoting women economic empowerment, starting from the early ages, starting from the girl child, all the way through the educational system and through the informal system as well. We have to be very deliberate about it, pushing out policies, pushing out legislations that ensure that we are supporting women, and we're also getting rid of both the conscious and unconscious biases that tell women that you can't get to this, you can't grow up to this, you can't aspire to be this. We need to ensure that we eliminate all of that and instead provide the supporting and enabling environments to ensure that we can help our women grow. And MSMEs are the lifeblood of any economy. And when we have an economy that more than 50% of those are owned by women, it is essentially critical to ensure that we empower these women and in turn empowering the MSMEs to ensure that we have a healthy economy, because now we're dealing with record high inflation, we're dealing with record high depreciation of the naira, we're dealing with low ton of revenues. So this is a clear solution to ensure that we fix all these everyday problems that we're facing right now.
Investing in women means investing in socioeconomic progression. It means investing in sustainable development. It means caring very deeply, about all our unique lived experiences as citizens and making provisions to ensure that, the resources are well allocated. For me, investing in women is wealth generation. It's really around socioeconomic survival. The conversation, on investing in women has gone beyond just women. It's not a women's issue, and I think that's what people need to understand. It's beyond women. It's the fact that we need to invest. In the Nigerian context, for example, we need to invest in half of the population. So how do we say we are pushing for economic development and growth when we are sidelining, undermining, under-deploying, under-resourcing half of the population? So for me, it only makes socioeconomic sense for any right-thinking individual to invest in women.